Hello everyone! It has been quite a while since I posted a video on this channel, and that's mostly due to work, life, and other stuff in between. But seeing as I have been obsessed lately with Asobo Studios and Focus Entertainment's newest release, A Plague Tale Requiem, I figured now would be a good time to revive the channel. And after playing and replaying both Innocence and Requiem myself recently, I can confidently say, wow! Both of these games are absolute masterpieces and easily worth the investment if you have the time and money. Regardless, today's video looks to explore a very interesting theory that was brought up on the Plague Tale subreddit about a month or so ago regarding the ending of Requiem. If you have not yet played the game start to finish, or if you're in the middle of a spoiler-free playthrough, or you're planning to play the games at some point and want to go in completely blind, leave this video now. This is your only warning. If you don't care about being spoiled, then I guess keep watching. Before we dive headfirst into this theory though, I need to explain the necessary context of the game so that everything I go over later makes more sense. I won't be spoiling too much from Innocence, but I'm gonna go over basically the entire ending of Requiem, along with other major story beats. That said, let's get started. The Plague Tale series takes place in 14th century France, at the height of the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War. The story follows the journey of Amicia de Rune and her little brother Hugo, who is a carrier of an extremely rare genetic blood disease known as the Prima Macula, which for the rest of this video I will simply refer to as the Macula. The primary gameplay sees you avoiding guards, rats, and damn near anything else that can easily kill you, as well as solving various puzzles along the way. As the story progresses, we learn that with Hugo's condition, he can actually control the rat swarms, with this new ability growing in strength after passing each new threshold. It's worth noting that any carrier of the macula is able to control the rats, as the rats are an extension of the macula itself. However, this takes a severe mental and physical toll on him, and it means that the macula's corruption is spreading, and if it's not slowed or outright stopped, it will take control of him entirely, which will ultimately lead to his death. In order to keep Hugo from giving in to the macula, Amicia assumes the role of protector, meaning, to put it bluntly, she keeps Hugo's emotions balanced, as severe stress or grief will rapidly progress the macula's corruption. In Chapter 4 of Innocence, the siblings meet Lucas, a novice alchemist who accompanies them on their journey and is able to shed some more light on the macula and how it can be slowed or stopped. Fast forward to Requiem. Hugo's condition is deteriorating and is only made worse by repeated traumatic events, including but not limited to witnessing the death of his mother, learning the fate of Basilius, the last carrier before Hugo, and the metaphorical nail in the coffin, watching Amicia get killed on the boat as they are leaving the island of Lacuna. After watching his sister die, Hugo loses all hope in humanity and fully gives up control to the macula. In the penultimate chapter of Requiem, Amicia and Lucas journey into the Nebula, which is, to put it simply, an area where the macula can spread without restrictions. It is here where Hugo now resides, as the cortex of the nucleus, that big tree thing, at the center of the nebula itself. After Amicia and Lucas drop down into the nebula, they face a series of trials while Hugo's subconscious speaks to them. After fighting off rat hordes for what seems like an eternity, Amicia relents and finally stops fighting. She is greeted by Hugo as the two embrace. The siblings then walk and talk as Hugo explains what I mentioned earlier. Amicia's supposed death was his breaking point, and he has fully given up control to the macula, becoming one with it. Amicia is clearly taken aback by this, but still remains optimistic that Hugo can be cured. Unfortunately, Hugo does not feel the same. He is too far gone and tells Amicia as much. He explains that, at this point, there is no saving him, and the only way to get the rats to stop spreading is if Hugo dies. He asks Amicia to do the deed, and after some initial hesitation, she reluctantly obliges. She meets up with Lucas, and the two make their way to the nucleus. With Hugo in their sights, it's time to end the spread of the macula, at least for now. It's here that the player has two choices. They can either kill Hugo themselves by slinging a rock at him as the screen cuts to black, or, if you wait for a while, you'll get more dialogue from Amicia and Lucas until you eventually get this cutscene.
I can't!
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
One year later, in the epilogue, Amicia meets up with Sophia as they prepare to search for the next carrier and prevent another plague. Before they do, Amicia heads to the summit of the mountain to pay respects at Hugo's memorial. So now that I've explained all the necessary plot points, let's finally take a look at this theory. The theory in question, which I will link in the description, suggests that everything that happens from the moment Amicia and Lucas drop into the nebula to the moment they kill Hugo is all an illusion created by the macula itself. Now, I will be the first to admit, I was skeptical at first as well, but there's actually some pretty compelling evidence to back this theory up. I want to start by showing you guys the full cutscene that plays right before Amicia and Lucas drop into the nebula. Listen very carefully to what Lucas says.
Look at you, hiding under a blanket, just like when you're sad.
The nebula's condensing around him. So much must be going on in there.
What should we expect to find?
Hard to tell. Think of it as a giant crucible where the macula, Hugo, and the nebula are merging. The visions of a deceived child dissolving into the atmosphere, changing the world. This is the last threshold. All natural laws stop here.
So we must cross it too?
To reach your brother, yes.
Right.
Did you catch it? Lucas says all natural laws stop here. This implies that within the confines of the nebula, the macula can do anything it wants, and I quite literally mean anything. If this quote is to be taken at face value, it means that the macula can subvert any and all natural laws of the world, which includes knowing what is real and what is not. But what is most interesting to me is that this also includes the natural laws of life and death. Meaning, if this theory comes to pass, there is a small but not insignificant chance that Hugo might not actually be dead and could still be alive somewhere. Now, I know that sounds crazy given everything I just talked about, but hear me out. If the macula did simulate everything that happened inside the nebula during Chapter 16, then it stands to reason that it simulated Hugo as well, meaning we probably didn't kill the real Hugo. There are, of course, other bits and pieces of evidence that support this, and I'm going to start with what I believe is the most damning piece of evidence, which is simply the fact that we never see Hugo get killed, nor do we ever see his body after the ending of Requiem. Now, you could make the argument that Hugo is a 5-year-old kid, and watching a 5-year-old kid dying would be pretty traumatic to anyone, especially considering everything he and Amicia went through. But there's one small inconsistency there. If you played through Innocence, you'll know that during Chapter 14, Blood Ties, you get to play as Hugo solo for the first time. There's a specific area in this chapter where, if you're not careful, Hugo can step into a horde of rats and die, and he's shown on screen getting eaten alive. Now obviously you're not supposed to die there, but the fact remains that Hugo is shown dying on screen in Innocence in what I personally believe is a more gruesome fate than a simple rock or crossbow to the head. Not only that, but near the beginning of Requiem, you can find the dead body of a child very early in the game. Clearly the devs are not ones to shy away from showing us extremely gruesome and gory imagery in these games, including that of children. So why is it suddenly so different with Hugo at the end of Requiem? But, I hear you ask, what about the epilogue when Amicia visits Hugo's grave? Doesn't that confirm he's dead? Well, not necessarily. I did briefly mention this scene earlier in the video, but I never said the word grave. I specifically used the word memorial, and I did that on purpose. If you look at the surrounding area where this cutscene plays, you'll see that it's mostly stone, especially around the memorial itself. Not exactly ideal for burying a body. Not to mention, it was difficult for Amicia to get to the top of the mountain by herself. I imagine it would be infinitely more difficult while carrying a child's body. In addition to this, there's a line of dialogue from Arno in Chapter 7 of Requiem where he says, quote, "Well, nothing's totally dead until it's completely buried." Now, this could just be a throwaway line, but in Chapter 3, A Burden of Blood, there are some graves you can interact with where Lucas says that people wanted to keep their dead close. Amicia then replies, quote, "I can understand that. We never buried father." Considering this, I feel that, given the chance, Amicia would choose instead to bury Hugo closer to her house rather than at the mountain's summit to give him the respect of a proper burial. But, I hear you ask again, what about the post-credits cutscene with the baby on the hospital and the macula on its skin? Admittedly, this one had me stumped for a little while. Most of the community have taken this cutscene as a teaser for a third game, this time set in the modern day. And while I wouldn't necessarily mind that, I personally don't think a modern day setting would feel right for a Plague Tale game, given what we've got so far with Innocence and Requiem. And it wasn't until recently that I found a few comments on Reddit explaining what this cutscene could mean in a symbolic sense. The comments briefly allude to the idea that, rather than being a teaser for a third game, the ending cutscene is instead a symbolic message of the macula's inevitability, and how it will persist for eternity through countless generations and endless bloodlines. One Redditor stated it perfectly with this comment when they said, quote, "I honestly think that people are reading far too much into the little scene at the end of Requiem. Asobo has said that Requiem could be the end of the series, but that it will ultimately depend on how well the game is received. So when they made that ending scene, I don't think they were thinking, this is how we're going to tease the next game. In my opinion, I think the ending scene is there to show that the macula can never be truly defeated, and it will just keep coming back." One could also see this ending cutscene as an intentional diversion by the developers to make us think we're getting a modern-day Plague Tale game, when in reality, the third game, if there is a third game, would be continuing or completing Amicia's character arc, whatever that entails. This next point is incredibly easy to miss if you're not paying attention. At the end of chapter 12, Emily, the Countess of Provence, kills Beatrice, the sibling's mother, and attempts to enact her plan to steal Hugo and raise him as her own child. Hugo, upon seeing his mother dead, overcharges with the macula's power in a fit of absolute rage, killing Emily in the process. After killing the Countess and falling through the floor, he becomes completely catatonic, barely blinking and hardly speaking for the first part of chapter 13. When he does speak, he speaks in a very monotone manner and exclaims that the area the crew fell into is home. He's able to show some emotion in his speech, but not much. Lucas explains that this is the macula speaking directly through Hugo, and it even goes so far as to try to get Hugo to stay in this area despite what Amicia and Lucas say. It isn't until they outrun the rat swarm that Amicia is able to bring Hugo back to reality. Later, in chapter 16, you might have missed that Hugo's speech pattern in the nebula is somewhat similar to how he spoke in chapter 13. I'm going to play a few clips from both chapters to show you how eerily similar both of these instances are.
Extinguish the flames.
We saw those things inside the carrier's tomb.
It will kill the sun.
What?
The Sun Killer. The Light Devourer. It's the nebula the old texts talk about. It's real.
I'm home.
It cannot be.
How many are there inside?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey,
I'm waiting.
let's go, Lucas, now.
Yes.
Come, Hugo.
No! I'm staying.
There is nothing here for you.
This is home. This is...
Stop! Did you put them here, Hugo?
No. You did.
Hugo! Oh, thank the Lord! Where are you?
I'm here. I'm close.
I can't see you!
Because you're still looking back.
Those birds are the only thing here! They're showing the way, aren't they?
We tried that way, Amicia, and it was a lie.
Not entirely. There was truth in it!
It was a lie, and it brought death.
People brought death! Hugo, I need a way to get you out of here!
You need new ways. Things have changed, but you're still thinking as if they haven't.
I'm trying! All right. What now? Hugo, where are you? Where are you?
I'm sorry, but you're ready now. To save everything.
Ready? How can I be ready for this?
I know, but I can't stop myself now. Only you can stop me.
Hugo!
I love you. I've been happy with you. Goodbye, Amicia.
I love you. I love you so much.
Monotone voice? Check. Little to no emotion? Check. Pessimistic outlook and outwardly defiant of Amicia's wishes? Check. This doesn't necessarily add to the idea of everything being an illusion, but it does imply to me that it might not have been Hugo speaking to us at the end of the game. Rather, it might have been the macula speaking through him once again. Now you're probably wondering, why would the macula create a simulation if it can spread unrestricted within the nebula? See, in order for the carrier to reach the final threshold, they have to fully give in to the influence of the macula and let it take all of them. For this to happen quicker and more effectively, the carrier and protector must be separated, and the carrier must be made to feel completely hopeless and alone. This was the case for Basilius and his protector Aelia. And if there's one thing we know about the macula, it's that we don't know about the macula. But if it's powerful enough to create something the size of the nebula after Hugo crosses the final threshold, one could assume that, at that stage, it would be extremely intelligent as well. Not necessarily sentient, but smart enough to know what it's doing. We know this to be true due to the dream that Hugo keeps having regarding the island. The macula keeps showing Hugo this island in his dreams with the promise of a permanent cure, when in reality, it's showing him what his fate might look like soon in the form of Basilius. This is enough proof to know that the macula is intelligent to a degree and is intentionally deceptive in nature. It's also proof enough to confirm that the macula is capable of creating simulations. Granted, this one wasn't a dream, but the fact remains that this dream was specifically curated by the macula itself several times over the course of several months just to deceive Hugo. It is abundantly clear that the macula is able to stay one step ahead of the carrier and protector at all times, so it could be argued that it's doing the exact same thing with the ending of the game, by intentionally deceiving Amicia. Remember, the macula is a disease that preys on strong emotions, and what better way to exploit those emotions than by making you think you need to kill your own brother to save the world. This next point is probably one of the more important ones due to the symbolism implied by it. We need to talk about the phoenix. As we play through Requiem, we see a phoenix at various important points. First, in Hugo's dream sequence at the beginning of the game, then the weather vane on the side of the house in the Red City, then at several points on the island of Lacuna, and finally scattered around the nebula at the end of the game. For those of you who don't know, the phoenix is commonly associated with the theme of rebirth. When a phoenix dies, it is reborn from the ashes after a short while and rises anew. So I'm left to wonder what kind of symbolism was implied here, considering the fact that we only ever see the phoenix in close association with Hugo. Think about it. Every single time we see a phoenix in-game, there is one common denominator that connects all of those instances, and its name is Hugo de Rune. Whether it's during his dream, seeing the weather vane on the house for the first time, finding the statues and artwork on Lacuna, or following the statues in the nebula, Hugo has some sort of unique connection to this bird in particular, and it's just enough of a coincidence to raise an eyebrow. There's also the curious case of Amicia's injury. In Chapter 5 of Requiem, Amicia gets bonked on the head by Arno and is left with a pretty gnarly scar. This injury severely affects Amicia in the following chapters, and we see that she is noticeably much weaker, and at one point she completely passes out for a few minutes from pain and blood loss. It doesn't take a genius to know that head injuries can be severely detrimental to a person's health, especially blunt force trauma as Amicia suffered. Such injuries can cause cognitive function to deteriorate, as well as memory loss and hallucinations. It's also worth noting that such injuries, depending on the severity, can last for up to multiple years. So it's not entirely out of the question that this injury could have caused Amicia to hallucinate everything that happened in the nebula. But even I admit this is a bit of a reach. This next point ties in quite nicely with one of my previous points. It's a common trope in movies, video games, and media in general that if you don't see a character die on screen, then they're most likely not actually dead. We saw an example of this in the early stages of Innocence with Beatrice. As the Inquisition raided the Rune estate, a bloodied sword is stabbed through a door with Beatrice on the other side. She's presumed dead for the majority of the game, until it's revealed in Chapter 11 that she's still very much alive, and that it was a servant that took the killing blow for her. So one could assume that the same trope is being used for Hugo in Requiem. In either ending sequence, whether Amicia or Lucas kill him, the screen cuts to black right before the kill shot reaches Hugo, so we never see him actually die. So if we're taking this trope at face value, we can reasonably assume that Hugo isn't dead simply because we didn't see it happen. Moving on, let's talk about the timeline of the game. At the beginning of Innocence, you start in the year 1348, and by the time Requiem ends, the game is set in the year 1350. But in real life, the Black Plague did not end until the year 1353, 3 years after Requiem ends. Now, you could argue that it's just a video game, and video games don't always adhere to real life, which is a fair argument to make. But on the other hand, throughout both Innocence and Requiem, we're only ever in France. Guyenne, the Chateau d'Ambrage, Provence, the Red City, Lacuna, Marseille, everywhere we go in-game is in France. In real life, the Black Plague ravaged all of Europe. So if the developers wish to do so, they have an entire continent to expand the story with. And, going back to my previous point about carrier-protector separation, they could make it so that if Hugo is alive, he's in an entirely different country in Europe, actively spreading the plague on behalf of the macula, not knowing that Amicia is still alive. Amicia could get word of this, travel there, and work to stop it, and potentially save her brother in the process. But let's talk about something else now before this becomes a fanfic. To be more specific, I want to briefly mention Hugo's wardrobe near the end of the game. I know that sounds weird at first, but there might be something there. The last time we see Hugo before the events of Chapter 16 is when he gets abducted by the Count of Provence, and in that scene, he's wearing his fancy clothes gifted to him by the Count, and he's even seen wearing that same outfit in the hallway sequence right before his death. But as we approach the nucleus, and if we zoom in with photo mode, we can now see Hugo wearing a completely different set of clothes, similar, if not the exact same outfit, to the one he was wearing in the early stages of the game as he's being experimented on by Vaudin. Now this could just be an oversight by the developers, and it most likely is. But if it's not, and they did this on purpose, then there might be a bigger meaning to it. And speaking of photo mode, there's a very interesting interaction you can witness under the right circumstances at the end of Chapter 16. One of the many editing effects you can use photo mode for is to filter out certain characters from a scene. For example, if you want a screenshot of Amicia and Hugo but Lucas is in the way, you can filter out Lucas and take the screenshot from there. There is one pretty major exception to this rule though. If you enter photo mode at the moment where you have to kill Hugo, then try to filter out just Hugo, nothing will happen and he will remain on the screen. However, if you choose to filter out other characters and animals, Hugo will disappear. This to me only adds to the idea that the Hugo we see on the nucleus is not the real Hugo. If it was, why would photo mode not filter him out at that moment when we check the Hugo box? Finally, let's backtrack real quick to the topic of characters' clothing. This time, let's take a look at Amicia. In the epilogue of Requiem, Amicia is seen sporting a new look, including shorter hair, new clothes, and a blue cloak that we've never seen her wear before. Obviously, this doesn't seem significant at first, but a Reddit user by the name LaserM2021 recently pointed out that in past centuries in Western Europe, there was an old proverb that says, "to be wrapped in a blue cloak." And the meaning of this proverb? To be deceived. Now, the first question that comes to mind would be, well, what's deceiving her? And obviously our primary suspect would be the macula, considering we know for a fact that the macula is, as I said earlier in this video, intentionally deceptive in nature. But as with nearly everything else in this video, we don't know this for sure. Finally, I want to mention one more slightly obscure thing about the end of the game. After you drop down into the nebula, as you fight the giant rat monsters, you'll notice these weird waveform things behind you distorting the surrounding area. This could just be a residual effect of the nebula, which is a fair assumption given that we know next to nothing about the macula or the nebula. These waveforms are present during the rat monster fight, the hallway sequence as you're walking with Hugo, and on the horizon shortly after you open the door. And then they disappear after Amicia meets back up with Lucas. Except for in one spot. Right when you reach Hugo, there's a fissure on the ground preventing you from physically reaching him. And coming out of that fissure are the exact same waveforms we see everywhere else in the nebula. Whether these waveforms are an indicator of an illusion or not is unclear. But if we're going off that theory, it only adds to the idea that everything that happened in the nebula wasn't real, nor was anything the waveforms surrounded, like Hugo. It would also explain why they suddenly disappeared when Lucas showed up, as it would indicate that he is in fact real. But again, we have no solid confirmation of that. So, that is the complete theory and all the evidence to support it. What do you guys think about it? Does it make sense, or are there too many theoreticals to make a judgment? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Personally, I think this theory has some potential to actually happen. Hell, if they play their cards right, the devs could make a third game based entirely on this theory, and Hugo and Amicia can finally get the happy ending they deserve. Or maybe I'm just high on copium, who knows. But considering the recent job listings on the Asobo Studios website, it seems as though a third Plague Tale game might, emphasis on might, already be in development. Whether this potential third game will be a direct continuation of the story after the events of Requiem, or something else entirely, is way too early to tell. But it seems clear to me that the door has not been fully closed on this series, and that Requiem was a big enough success to warrant a possible third game. Before we conclude today's video though, the question will inevitably arise and has already been discussed ad nauseum on social media. If Hugo is brought back in a future installment, does that devalue the ending of Requiem? That is a question I'm going to leave for you, the audience, to decide. I'm not here to make a biased judgment and sway your opinion. I simply put forth the theory and the evidence to back it up. In the past, I would have said no, because I hated the idea of Hugo being dead for good, but my viewpoint has changed since then. I've heard both sides of the argument, with people saying that the ending would be better or worse if Hugo somehow lived. Like I said, I'm not here to make that judgment, I'm leaving it for you to decide. But, seeing as we've been talking about the idea of illusions throughout this video, I need to hit you guys with a hard dose of reality. None of what I said in this video truly matters in the grand scheme of things. This theory is exactly that, a theory. It can neither be confirmed nor denied until it's commented on by the developers, if they choose to comment on it at all. Anyways, that's all from me for now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about this theory, I am very interested to hear it. Until the next one, goodbye, and good night.